with that need for a bit of long-term wisdom about how we can continue to expand those gains for many, many years to come. Really what that comes down to is, the concept of sustainability, which is a buzzword, probably one of the loudest buzzwords that we have here at the UN. But obviously just talking about sustainability is quite easy, but then it gets a little bit more difficult when we kind of start describing sustainability and writing it down. But fantastically, after 10 years of negotiations in 2019, we did manage to describe what long-term sustainability looks like here at the UN with the agreement of the LTS guidelines. And then what we're here today to do is to shift, not just talking about it, writing it down, but actually doing it. We've got a range of panelists from across the commercial space sector who are putting space sustainability into practice. And they're here to talk to us about what those experiences are like, and to map those experiences across the areas covered in the 21 LTS guidelines. Hopefully the listeners can hear the lessons learned, hear those experiences, and start sharing meaningful action in this important topic. So with that, we're going to open with a couple of opening remarks. First, it's a great honor to pass the floor to Director Simonetta Di Pippo from the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and then a few comments from our UK colleagues who, without their support, this event today wouldn't be possible. So over to you, Director Di Pippo, please, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ian, and distinguished guests, ambassador, and speakers. It is really a great pleasure for me to welcome you today to this first virtual event under UNUSA's new Promoting Space Sustainability, Awareness Raising and Capacity Building related to the implementation of the LTS Guidelines project. Allow me to underline how pleased I am to be here addressing you on this important topic, together with Ambassador Kitzel, who will be giving some opening remarks from the UK side shortly. At this early point, I would also like to express sincere appreciation to the UK Space Agency for sponsoring this activity. Today's event marks the start of UNUSA's efforts to step up our engagement with the global space sector on the important topic of space sustainability. The virtual event series, to include a total of 3 events, is designed to create a multi-stakeholder dialogue, creating a space for peer-to-peer exchanges amongst representatives from industry and the private sector, space agencies, and regulatory bodies. These events aim to allow speakers to showcase, in their own words, what space sustainability looks like in practice and not just on paper. When I say in practice, I emphasize the core element of this niche multi-stakeholder project. All speakers invited are asked to share brief operational case studies on how they are addressing space sustainability. The case studies will reflect how the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space activity of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, adopted only 2 years ago, are already being implemented on an everyday operational basis. As many of you may know, it is one of the duties of UNUSA to maintain an open source register of all objects launched into outer space, which is called the United Nations Register of Objects Launched into Outer Space. In 2020, our office reported the record number of launches with more than 1,200 objects delivered into orbit. This number of launched objects last year far exceeded the previous 2 years' figures combined. So, what we know for sure is that we are witnessing an exponential growth of objects in outer space, and we are still unaware of the threshold which will render near-Earth space unusable. Linked to the finite nature of space as a natural resource and our increasing dependence on it, is the crucial need to follow sustainable practices in outer space. We live now in a rapidly booming global space economy. Such accelerating growth of the economy, however, comes with its critical consequences. As we have learned on Earth, it is the international community, including scientists, the private industry, states, civil societies, academia, and international organizations that must take the lead in protecting the environment and ensuring the benefits of outer space can be used equitably, both by the current generation and by future ones. Dear colleagues, we are here today recognizing the need for ongoing action to ensure the continuous and sustainable use of space. UNUSA's aim for the promoting space, sustainability, awareness raising, and capacity building related to the implementation of the LTS guideline project, and indeed this event series, is to focus our collective mindset on practical actions that support space sustainability. I believe sharing stories and learning from each other is an excellent way to go about achieving this. Thank you. I wish you all a productive and successful event. And thanks again for being with us. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Director, for those words. I think you managed to summarize quite a lot in a very short amount of time. So we really, really appreciate that. Okay, we can now thank Alice from the UK Space Agency for a few opening remarks from their side as the sponsors for today's event. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you very much, Simonetta. It's lovely to virtually be with you all here this morning. Indeed, we're absolutely delighted that the UK has been able to fund this incredibly important work with UNUSA. Probably most people around the table won't know that this is actually the first time that the UK Space Agency has funded a project with UNUSA. Why would that be? Well, the reason would be is we didn't have fund before to support these globally collaborative efforts with the UN, and now we do. And really what you take from that is the UK government's recognition that space is an increasingly important domain for us. We've seen it in other countries around the world. Ian eloquently highlighted in his introduction as Simonetta on the waking up, if you like, around the world of the importance of space. And in the UK, this is very, very clearly evidenced, I think, by the formation of a national Space Council. So that tells you that space is being considered really at the very top table in the UK. And we've also committed to deliver a new national space strategy within the next 6 months. So it absolutely follows that if we are considering space to be so important, we must absolutely take care of the operating environment and the sustainability of the operating environment. And, you know, as Ian said, it is really time now to move to implementation. We don't want to sleepwalk into a very difficult situation in space, as some would argue we have already done with the climate of our own planet. So it is absolutely incredibly important that we take action now. In the UK, we're starting to do that, some reform of our regulations. So we've had the Outer Space Act, space activities. We're bringing in an additional act which will enable launch in the UK. In all of this effort, in all of this work, we will continue to be guided by best practice and really looking to the leadership that bodies like UNUSA can show in this area. We think it's a tremendous achievement that we've adopted these 21 guidelines and sustainability in 2019, and we're delighted to play our part in moving on to implementation of these. We recognise that we all have our role to play. We recognise that UN really does remain the cornerstone for these international collaborations, although we must seize every opportunity. We must seize every opportunity in our multilateral engagements to make sure we press the importance of the sustainability of space. And certainly the UK, through our presidency of the G7 this year, will be hoping to shine a light again on this very important agenda item for us all. So it's very fitting that I introduce here today the first industry event, because although I've talked a lot about governments, of course, it's the industry themselves that will really, really help us drive progress here. So the efforts of bodies like CONFERS, the efforts of some of the initiatives of the World Economic Forum are all valuable tools to bring to bear here. So I hope we have an incredibly productive day ahead. Of course, this won't be the last event. There'll be many more to come, but I'm sincerely delighted that we are now getting some focus on this incredibly important topic, and that governments, the commercial sector and regulators are all coming together to tackle this. Thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you, Alice, for those kind words. I think you've set the scene really nicely, and we've got a great double panel of commercial space sector representatives from across the world. So really looking forward to hearing from them in due course. But can I now give the floor, please, to Ambassador Kitzel here at the UK mission in Vienna. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks to Anusa for allowing me to add a few introductory remarks. It's great to see that so many people have joined this morning's meeting, and I guess one of the benefits of holding it virtually is that I expect even more representatives from different time zones will be able to join this afternoon's session as well. As Alice said, the UK is proud to have funded this project on space sustainability awareness raising and capacity building, and I think it's a great example of concrete implementation of the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. But why is it so important? Well, the LTS guidelines were negotiated over the course of a decade, so a pretty long negotiation, and a landmark achievement, I think, of multilateral diplomacy. And of course, they were endorsed by the UN General Assembly in New York in 2019. And of course, a decade might seem like a very long time, but it shows how COPUOS is able to consensually define the global governance of outer space and to establish new international law and regulations, as well as address and respond to the needs of industry and an increasingly, as we know, congested space environment. As Alice and Simonetta have said, today's event is a historical first, the first time the UK has given funding to the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and with COPUOS member states agreeing to convene a new long-term sustainability working group from now until 2025, it really marks the UK's commitment to support the process. And I think that's in four ways. Firstly, by promoting the sustainability of the outer space environment to maintain access to that for future generations. And then secondly, encouraging the effective implementation of the LTS guidelines, which is obviously important, delivering the thing that we've actually agreed. Thirdly, supporting member states to engage constructively in the LTS working group at COPUOS. And then fourthly, identifying gaps and challenges associated with the LTS guideline implementation so that we can support the capacity building needs of all countries. And attendees at this meeting and elsewhere will have noticed the UK stepping up our global action on outer space across the whole multilateral system. We were delighted that the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly supported our resolution in 2020 on reducing space threats through norms, rules and principles of responsible behaviours. And that shows the UK's leadership across the space security agenda, which is focused in Geneva, alongside the commercial and civil and peaceful uses here in Vienna. So let me just close by commending the efforts of Simonetta and all the staff at ANUSA for championing this agenda. It's great that through events like this, the views of industry can feed into international and intergovernmental processes, and we're a really strong supporter of those kind of partnerships across sectors. And we look forward to working with you over the course of this project, and I certainly look forward to seeing the outcome of these discussions. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And thank you to all of our opening speakers for those fantastic words to really set the scene for today's event. Okay, so now let's dive into the details with our first panel session. We are going to have 5 speakers from across the commercial space sector, and we'll be starting first with Mr. Silvio Sandrone from Airbus. And each of these speakers are going to be delivering short presentations, basically putting the details into what space sustainability looks like in practice from their perspective. So Mr. Sandroni, over to you, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Dear Director, dear Ambassador, distinguished guests, I'm really honored to be able to participate in this session on such a crucial topic from a home, not because of the pandemic today, but because in this part of the world, near the North Sea coast of Germany, we are particularly bad at removing snow, even in small amounts, so I'm stuck home. A kind of debris, if you wish. So Airbus, as an Earth citizen, is of course extremely concerned about the topic of space debris and the sustainability of space because of the tremendous societal and economic benefits that space activities bring to the Earth and all its inhabitants, humans or otherwise. And also, I have to confess, this is our business. And we care about the sustainability of our business. So we have a vested interest in making sure that this business is sustainable in the long term. And I have to say that because of this, we are really impressed that the United Nations has managed to rally the international community around a set of guidelines that are designed exactly with that purpose in mind. And what I would like to do today is to share a few examples of how practically in our everyday work we live the topic of sustainability. So if you can move to the next slide first. So first of all, just a few figures which I had to look up and that are really well, staggering and worrying. So as you can see from the picture, Earth orbit is a dirty place. We are counting 34,000 bits of debris, which are larger than 10 centimeters in size and which are tracked from the Earth. But if you go down to 1 centimeter size, the number of pieces of trash is actually close to 1,900,000 and counting. Now that 1 centimeter is like a marble. That doesn't sound like a lot, but at 9 kilometers per second, an impact, of course, can completely destroy a satellite. And by the way, generating more impacts. The total mass of this mess exceeds 9,000 tons, which is the equivalent of the Eiffel Tower. Somewhere in space. And 3/4 of all this debris are concentrated in LEO, which should not lead people who do not use LEO to consider it's not their problem, because if you want to go to the more economically useful orbits like geostationary orbit, you do need to fly through LEO. And so the pollution in LEO poses really a threat to the long-term navigability, let's say, of space around Earth. So what does sustainability mean for a company like us and implementing the long-term sustainability guidelines of the United Nations? We see that as a three-pronged approach. So the first one is think before you do, which is, let's say, goes under the label of eco-design. And then the second one is manage when assets are in space, which means mitigate. So developing space assets in a way that will not produce debris or generate as few as possible. Avoidance, which means being able to track and to anticipate potential collisions and, of course, avoid them. And the last bit is to be able to capture and remove those debris, so cleaning up a little bit space. And then the third dimension is probably the Holy Grail, which means actually turning trash into something valuable. We talk about space resources. The nearest and most abundant source of space resources is here in near Earth orbit, where you have all those space assets that could be repurposed and in sometimes and sometimes even recycle. So I think on the eco design, what does that mean? Well, that means looking at every aspect, every stage of your activity, and not just the spacecraft in space, and making sure that you take the necessary steps for sustainability. So the Joint Research Centre of the European Union has produced an ISO certified method and management tool called the life cycle assessment, which applies to every type of industrial activity. So we have implemented that for our own space activities, and so we carry out systematically life cycle assessments and an impact assessment for every step of our activities and every part of the let's say space system value chain. So this is not just, again, the space asset in orbit, is the processes to design, to manufacture, to integrate the space asset, as well as its ground segment. And the life cycle of a space asset in space, but also on Earth, also includes what happens after you finish using it, which means the retirement and disposal. Concerning the space debris dimension, on the mitigation area, as you know, there are laws and regulations and guidelines which have been established by either national governments or sometimes multilateral organizations or operational agencies. And so, for example, we implement in particular the French space operations law because we are also based in France, and as you know, Europe Spaceport is based in French Guiana. And those guidelines of the French space law refer not only to the actual act of launching, but also of how long should a space asset, let's say, leave orbit, the useful orbit after its useful life, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to talk about in particular today is the removal aspect, because we have some cool stuff to show to you. And if we can move to the next slide, maybe. Yes, thank you. So we have been part together with EBA, so together with SSTL, we've been part of the Remove Debris project, which is co-funded by the European Union's framework program number 7. And we, among our partners, we have the Surrey Space Centre in the UK, INRIA in France, and the Netherlands Innovative Solutions in Space, Switzerland CSCM, and South Africa Stellenbosch University. So Remove Debris is a mission that actually flew, and it included 3 technologies, the demonstration of 3 technologies, which are key for being able to actually capture and remove debris. So on the left, you see what we call the net. So it's a technology where you're able to capture an uncooperative space object by throwing a net, like a fishing net, at it, and then well, closing the net and capturing the object. So this part was led by our teams in Bremen, and as you can see from the video, it was an impressive and smashing success. The second one is a more violent one, is the Harpoon, which was designed by our team in Stevenage in the UK, where you have a target which is positioned 1.5 meters away at the end of a boom, so to avoid generating debris in the process. And as you see, we fired the Harpoon at it at the speed of 20 meters per second. So the Harpoon penetrated the target, and and then of course with the cable, the let's say the debris was tightly secured. And the third one, which is less violent but equally important, that was developed by our Toulouse team, so in France, is the VBN, so Vision-Based Navigation System, where we tested a two-dimensional camera and a three-dimensional LiDAR, light detection and ranging, to track a target CubeSat that was, let's say, released, as you can see in the video on the right, and was left tumbling. And this also, of course, if you want to capture something, you need to have a net or a harpoon or any solution, but you need first to detect the target and to actually be able to track it and also understand its kinematics. So the three bricks together are among the technology elements that you need to dispose of in order to be able one day to collect and remove debris. I mentioned shortly, I haven't got a video for that, the recycling bit. We are developing right now the world's first 3D printer that works with metal to be deployed in space. We'll deliver that to the European Space Agency by the end of the year. And of course, the best incentive to take care of your trash is when the trash is actually of value. And I think we can move to the next slide, where I would like to conclude. We all understand that taking care of our near Earth environment is key for the sustainability. And in order to bring everybody to a virtuous behavior, you need a set of guidelines like the ones developed and promoted by the United Nations. Of course, you may need an economic incentive, like the one of recycling spent space assets. And at one point, you might also need a more coercive system where everybody who uses space may have to pay to dispose of the trash. Like when you live in a town, in a city, of course, it's a common shared interest to remove garbage and to do it in an orderly way. And the most economic efficient way is actually to have the local community management to have everybody pay a little bit for that and then to organize the service. So how to do that, it's another topic. But in order to tackle the topic of debris, of course, you need the guidelines, you need the rules, you need to design for sustainability. You need the technology to be able to remove the debris, and then you need the appropriate set of economic incentives to make sure that gets done. Thank you very much.
And thank you, sir, for that really comprehensive overview of what's happening in Airbus. And as expected from such an established stakeholder, you've really got the A to Z there in terms of what space sustainability looks like in practice. So thank you for sharing those remarks. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I do understand that your schedule may draw you away before the Q&A at the end of this session. So I do encourage colleagues to please post questions as we go in the chat to try and catch the presenters as they are here. Of course, another key part of this event is about networking. It's about getting peer-to-peer exchange going on. So please do keep in touch after the event as well. But thank you again, sir, for those remarks. Really, really welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Perfect. We're now going to move on to the next speaker, who's Mr. Shadi El-Shafi from the Egyptian Company for Space Applications and Remote Sensing. So, Mr. El-Shafi, I'm just going to see if you are hearing this okay and your audio is working for you over in Cairo. So I'm going to just hit pause to see if everything's all right, because I think we did get one message. Perfect. We can see you, sir. And I think you might be on mute. Let's have a look if we can change that. 2 seconds. Unfortunately, you're still on mute, I'm afraid. Is there something on your end that works? Because it doesn't look like, I'm just getting a message from our colleagues. It doesn't look like we have an option to unmute you, which is, there we go. Perfect.
Is it working now?
Loud and clear, loud and clear. Okay, so let's have a look at what space sustainability looks like from your perspective. So please, over to you. The floor is yours.
I would like to thank you for the opportunity. First of all, good morning, and I hope everyone is doing well. I would like to present a greeting to my fellow members and colleagues from the Egyptian Space Agency who are attending right now. First of all, I would be talking from another point of view or a different perspective today regarding the space sustainability and how it's being dealt with in Arab Republic of Egypt. Knowingly, we have in Egypt started our own space progress within the start of 2011, where there was remarkable and noticeable events where we launched as a government with the Ukrainian space agencies. We have launched our first satellite, and then following on 2014, 2019 was the last launch. On the memory of the last launch, we would like to also present our fellow Emirati, the United Arab Emirates Space Agency, with their newest achievement, and hopefully it will reach today with safety to Mars. In regards to my talk today, I will be talking about how did Egypt as a government develop its own space program over the last 20 years, the last 2 decades. What were the last current projects that have affected the government and the people itself, and how it has helped us to view the space sustainability in a wider frame. As you all know, we are currently a starting country where we started to gather our own momentum for the space culture and the space technologies. We have good practice and good experience with the space technologies for the last decade, where we had experimental and our own experiences with regarding the technologies and whatever challenges and risks they pose through. Currently with the Egyptian government, we have been working with them as our company, Egyptian Space Company for Space Applications and Remote Sensing, as a first private company established in Egypt with the decree to work in the space technologies and space applications sphere with full permits from the government to operate in a commercial sector. We were helping the Egyptian government with their application usages of satellites and all over the Arab Republic of Egypt. One of the projects that we have worked on with National Authority for Remote Sensing and Space Sciences in Arab Republic of Egypt is that we had to work on the urban localization problem, which we had a huge growth of huge reproduction rate of people. More than 5 million people around each year were increasing, and we had to deal with that issue alongside with the legal growth. This is going to be linked but at the conclusion part, how it have affected the space sustainability in our Egyptian program and how do we view it. But currently, one of the issues that we had with the planning of urban communities is that we had a huge problem with the human factor, where we had a lot of problems and challenges and risks regarding that with our economical situation. But we have developed a system with the GIS systems, including the space imagery, including the legal databases, legal financial bases, and all of them interconnecting them to preview an urban view all over the Egypt regarding the whole levels of statistics and their possibilities of differentiation. We were working with the governmental bodies to represent this opportunity, and in order to have good results, which were presented by the President of Arab Republic of Egypt regarding the whole movement of urban communities to different areas based on the system GIS presented and the results produced. Currently, with this system, we are developing more ideas in order to increase the possibilities for this system alongside predictability functions for our own borders, alongside helping the government to choose where to build, where to assess the new communities will pop. One of the problems we had in Arab Republic of Egypt that there were towns that were built with targeted populations to reach within 5 years of living up to 200,000 people, but the current targets for the last year were 1,000 inhabitants in a whole town. This had provided us with different insights and how to approach this problem, as well as it had different type of influences, as in the societal levels influence, economical influence, and different other influences that affected the whole judgment of this process. This project had been fully finished with the government and released by the president in order to move different sectors of the communities all over Egypt and to reallocate the urban communities and urban population. How this affect and assist the sustainability aspect is, first of all, we are emerging country in regarding space technologies and the applications. We currently are building our own infrastructure of databases of technologies, even the infrastructure assisted in order to attain information and knowledge. Also, this helps us. But how does this connect regarding the space sustainability? In our case, because we had an issue where we couldn't solve it in normal legal cases, we had to use the space technology alongside the applications and the process alongside developed in order to produce results, as in predicting movement, predicting the reproduction rates for different places alongside the natural resources available in such areas, giving worth to the information provided to the decision makers and decision takers, specifically the political figures in our country. This helped us to spread the awareness and information regarding that the space technologies and applications, they have a good use. They have really beneficial applications that can affect our daily lives from day to day, thus giving an economical importance to such technologies and acquiring such infrastructure and spending investments in the space sector. Because one of the political decisions to take whether to invest in space technology is to weigh the differences. Is it better to invest in space technologies or invest in a different aspect of life, or different sphere that can affect the daily life of the governmental and people living in such country? Because due to the economic situation, this gives us a huge risk and challenge factor in when compared in a political scene, whether this technology is interested in or not. But with this importance of such results gave us the opportunity in order to present to the government and all related institutes in Arab Republic of Egypt that there is a need, there is a huge amount of benefit that can be procured through the developing the sustainability programs, the sustainability methods, the approaches, how to design the spacecraft, if we were talking about it, how to deal with such aspect of the space sustainability. In our case, spreading the information and awareness in such aspect, whether it's developing our own journals, magazines, talking about them, making semi-type of meetings, helps to progress this type of discipline in Arab Republic of Egypt. Thank you very much.
And thank you, sir, for those remarks. And I really appreciated the fact that you went full circle in terms of connecting what we're talking about in terms of space sustainability and how the importance of investing in space sustainability in space, and then how those investments can then flow to making a real difference in terms of sustainability from space here on the ground. So thank you for providing all of those details. Really appreciate that. Now we're moving on to our next speaker. So we're staying in Africa. We're going to Nigeria next, with Miss Amibola Alali, the CEO of Ecom. And before you start, please hold on 1 second. I'll just point out that we are getting some great questions coming in on the chat. So I invite all speakers to engage in those questions in the chat function as we go. And I also just want to remind folks that all of the speakers today have been providing examples of their operational case studies. So the examples of how their activities are being mapped in the context of the LTS guidelines. And so they're going to be posted online going forward. As you can see, some speakers have slides in addition, and some speakers don't, but we're leaving that to the open and relaxed, informal manner of today's event. So with that, please, I give the floor to you, Ms. Alali, for comments from Ecomsat's perspective. The floor is yours. Over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. MC. Good morning, the director of UN-USA, the organizers of this event, the UK, the sponsors, and the ambassador of UK in Vienna that is present at the meeting, and all other participants listening to this event. I'd like to commend the UN-USA for organizing this event, because it further creates awareness on peaceful uses of space, not just the awareness on peaceful use, but dovetailing it to actual practicability of implementing the treaties of outer space that were signed by different member states. And Nigeria ascended to this treaty since 1967. And that shows that whatever we do in Nigeria, we try as much as possible to conform to those treaties and not be and not do anything that would go against the peaceful users of outer space. So on that note, I will be sharing the experience of NIGCOMSAT, that's the Nigerian Communication Satellite. It's a national commercial satellite operator of the communication satellite series. Nigerians do go into, we have remote sensing satellites. We also have communication satellite, but NIGCOMSAT is in charge of the communication satellites, while the remote sensing satellites of Nigeria is being, and the operations of those satellites are being handled by the Space Agency. So in order to support the work of UN-USA, I'd like to tell you that most of our operations are actually been in conformity with the LTS guidelines. For example, in regards to guidelines A, B, C, D, we have areas where we've actually complied, or our actions are being in conformity with those guidelines. For example, our work in the ITU is actually in conformity with guidelines A4, B1, and B2, which states that we must coordinate and share information with relevant authorities. And because of that, we've had over 95% of successful coordination of that, because if we do not coordinate our orbital work well, then we may have interference, and that's also against peaceful uses of ATAS, because I know UN promotes peaceful uses, and we do not want one organization's work to disturb the other. So we constantly coordinate with different countries or bodies or companies that request for coordination with our satellite, because our satellite is positioned very in 42 degrees east, and we have so many other satellites, like the presenter from Airbus stated, the orbital space is highly congested with different satellites, and we have so many other satellites that are actually positioned very close to our satellites. So constantly we have to coordinate so that we avoid any collision, any form of collision, and also conform to what the LTS guidelines. And I also want to tell you that even before this LTS was approved 2 years ago, what we did when we were deorbiting our first satellites, the Nigerian communication satellite NIGCOMSAT-1, we discovered that it was actually in conformity with guideline B9, because every risk, we try to avert every risk that is actually with deorbited objects. So we coordinate, we make sure that we reserved enough propellant to make sure it was properly taken to a safer orbit, so that it doesn't collide with any other satellite. And we reused that same orbit for our next satellites, which they 1 hour. So it just shows you that Nigeria will constantly, and NIGCOMSAT will constantly, conform to all the guidelines that is being rolled out and being rolled out by UN also. And of course, on guideline C3, D1, we have been working very closely with other, with so many young researchers, scientists, space interests, and everybody in the industry to promote and support space awareness and capacity development. Of most recent is the work we did with Acting Space. Acting Space is actually a competition that is always sponsored or organized annually by the European Space Agency. And for this year event, NIGCOMSAT actually sponsored a team of five researchers and young people who were very much interested in space. And they participated, and last week was the last event on the 4th and 5th. We sponsored their participation in that competition. So we continue to do things to create awareness, both locally and internationally. We cooperate with people, different, for even with Thales and Lenia, that's something with the industry. We do some corporate collaborations in developing applications that will be of benefit to people in a safely manner. And we had a successful test flight of, the space-based augmentation system to make sure that aircraft fly safely with ASECNA, that's the Agency for Area Safety and Navigation in Africa, using NIGCOMSAT L-band and some equipment provided by Thales and Lenia. We were able to demonstrate that we could actually have satellite could contribute to safety of the aviation sector in the world, especially in Africa. And so there's so many of the guidelines of the LTS that NIGCOMSAT is actually complying or conforming, our operations actually in conformity with. And then back home again, in order for the guidelines A1 to 3, we cooperate with our national regulatory body, which is actually in order to make sure that we have peaceful uses of frequency spectrum. There is nothing, because ITU, allocates the frequency spectrum on a first come basis to different countries, and in order for us to tie in to peaceful users of outer space, we always make sure that all our actions are in conformity with what is agreed on at every ITU event. And to this end, there are quarterly meetings that we attend with NCC, that's the Nigerian regulatory body for the Nigerian Communications Commission regulates frequency allocation in Nigeria, and we always meet with them. And recently, we're also debating, using some of our C-band spectrum for deployments of 5G in order to give satellite the required visibility it needs in the race to 5G, and so that satellite work is not left behind, and that also we ensure that the spectrum is used safely and preserved for future generations to come. So we work closely with NCC, and we continue to promote international cooperation for long-term sustainability in accordance with the guidelines C1. And of course, in order to also promote spacecraft sustainability and appropriate record information, as stipulated in guidelines B2 to B8, NICOM said we always perform our station keeping, and we have done over 300 east-west station keeping. First, to make sure that we maintain our allotted orbital position, and that we also archive those data so that we can have a means of improving our orbital operations. We look at what is done properly, and whenever anything goes wrong, we look at it so that we can actually make sure that we have good procedures. We've documented over 300 east-west station keepings, and we share this archive with this information with other interested satellite operators, because we also we provide different services. So we do in-orbit tests for other satellite operators. We also do station keeping for other satellite operators. So in order to improve accuracy of our information they are properly well documented, and we are always sharing information with any operator that wants such. And that is actually, as I said earlier, in conformity with the guidelines B2 to B8 of the LTS. So, and somebody mentioned, how do we make sure that we entrench the LTS in everybody's operation? I think if events like this, organized by UN USA, is very necessary. We need to have more. We need to share more experiences. We need to encourage one another. I do know that the LTS may not be very binding on member states, but it would be of great help if we continue to have this kind of conversation, so that we can know where we're falling behind and what we need to do, and we can encourage everybody to key into this LTS for the future generation to come. So that's my very small experience that's coming from NICOMSAT. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You hit on a perfect point, which is how do we get the commercial sector working with government, working with the public sector, working with the regulators, and then obviously both at the international level with the international organizations that you mentioned, and then also bringing that into the domestic level as well. It's not easy, but there's lots of different players and lots of different parts to this puzzle. But thank you so much for giving that really holistic overview of the situation in your company and the situation in Nigeria. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you. So to participants, I do point you in the direction of the chat. There are some really good questions coming in, so please do feel free to engage in a dialogue there to take full advantage of our time together. And now it's my absolute pleasure to move on to the next speaker, which is Mr. Takeshi Hakamada. who is joining us, I think, all the way from Tokyo in Japan. So good evening to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. You're the CEO of iSpace, and we're really looking forward to seeing how you're bringing in the concept of sustainability into your operations and how those operations are mapped onto the 21 LTS guidelines. So please, Mr. Hakamada, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much introduction, and it's very honor for me to have opportunity present my company and then my thought about the sustainability here today. My company is doing the lunar exploration, so this is a very more futuristic activity. However, this become real recently. US and China is actively working on the lunar exploration, and then also including Japan, other countries started to plan new lunar exploration, and including ourselves, a commercial company is very interested in lunar exploration and then also utilization of the water resources on the lunar surface. And then from the beginning, I think that sustainability is important, and then I'd like to share my thought, not only just the Earth and then the orbit around the Earth, but also including Moon, cislunar sustainability. So could you show my presentation, or shall I share my screen?
I would, if you can share your screen, sir, then perhaps that's the most convenient. We do have your slides, so we can do it ourselves as well.
Just a moment.
No problem. Perfect.
Okay. So just at a glance about the iSpace first, I established this company 2010, 10 years ago. Currently, we have over 100 employees with 25 nationalities, very diverse team. And then we are headquartered in Tokyo, Japan, but also we have office in Luxembourg in Europe, and then also Denver, Colorado in United States. And then, we are currently providing transportation service, payroll service, data service, and partnership service. And then so far, we successfully raised over around $130 million US from mainly from Japanese financial player and then large corporation. But interestingly, our investor is not specialized in space business. They are looking for new opportunity in space. Our vision is expand our planet, expand our future, which means we want to expand our human presence into outer space, and then making the Earth and the Moon one ecosystem. In order to realize this vision, we have concept called Moon Valley 2040. I'd like to show you short videos. I hope it works well. I think there's no sound. Sorry. Sorry, I think I cannot play sound, so let me skip this video.
No problem. And I would just remind colleagues that the slides will be uploaded afterwards, so people can watch it at their leisure. So please, back to you.
Yeah, please watch this video later on. It's very exciting video. So the essence of this video is we believe that more than 1,000 people are working and living in the lunar surface in 2040, and then more than 10,000 people traveling around the Earth and the Moon. And then this kind of the world could be created through the utilization of the water resources on the lunar surface. So that's why we think that water on the lunar surface is important. And then the water can be divided into hydrogen and oxygen, and it becomes propellant fuel for the rocket and spacecraft. Not only just water for the human, but also the propellant is important. And then once we can establish gas station in space using the propellant from the moon, we can transform lunar, space logistics very efficient way. And then, of course, that would promote more activities for deep space missions, but also this is key to sustain life on the Earth as well, because our modern life is supported by the space asset, including satellite. And then the next question would be how to maintain such a space infrastructure efficient way. And then the key is utilize resources from the space. So first, what we are going to do is first establish frequent transportation system to the lunar surface, and then find waters on lunar surface. And then we're gonna start establish water exploration system, and then we will establish hydrogen energy ecosystem on the lunar surface. And then I believe we can lead to the Moon Valley 2040 concept 2040. So now we are working on the development of the two hardwares, lunar lander and then lunar rovers for the exploration. Because we are a commercial company, so we are doing business. So as a business, we're gonna deliver the payload to the lunar surface from the space agencies or the commercial companies, so on. And then also we are leveraging advertisement opportunities for the commercial companies as a partnership program. However, this is not only just advertising. We are partnering with them to create, to develop technology to meet with the lunar environment in future using their partners' technologies. And then also we started to share the lunar data to the potential customers for the lunar exploration. Then, so this is our business, but speaking of the sustainability, we believe that utilization of the space resources is key for the use of the space, sustainable use of space, of course, and then also the sustainability of the Earth as well. And then the point is how to utilize, make the commercial company to utilize the water economically reasonable way. And then currently in globally, as you may know, there's several actions trend already happening, like Artemis Accord set by US, and then HARG International Space Resource Governance Working Group. We have been discussing the entire comprehensive scope of the how to regulate the resource utilization in space. And then also already some of the bill already approved in United States, Luxembourg, and then recently UAE to allow commercial players to own the resources in space and then sell and then purchase. And then as for speaking of iSpace, from the early days, we think that very important to promote sustainability of the space resources. So in 2017, at the UN Corpus, where I had the opportunity to present to utilize space resources as a commercial effort. And then also we have been involved in a HARG working group from headquarters and also from the Luxembourg office. And then we are communicating with Japanese government to establish legislation about the use of the space resources. Well, currently, where Japanese Diet is going to discuss this legislation this year. And then also we are selected one of the two of the four companies NASA purchased lunar regoliths on the lunar surface. So this is very experimental activities. We think that we can find many difficulties, not only technical perspective, but also the political or regulatory perspective and the process perspective. But it's, I think, the necessary action to understand what we have to do and then clarify what we have to solve. So this is still a very early phase talking about the sustainability, but it's very important to utilize the past experience we had in the orbit sustainability and then also the sustainability on the Earth, because especially the Moon has a surface. So this is many aspects different from the practice in space. So we like to utilize as many of knowledge to set well, proper regulation and guidelines to keep sustainability. Thank you very much.
And thank you, sir. And what a great point to end on there in terms, and that's really what we're talking about as we shift things from being on paper into being in practice. And congratulations to iSpace for all of the great work that you're doing and the great work that you have in the pipeline coming down. So certainly all the best, and thank you for joining us today. Okay, absolutely perfect. We're now moving on to the last speaker for this morning session. And just before I do go to you, Mr. Shave from Inmarsat and UK Space, I do see, I'm looking at right now at the chat function, a whole bunch of questions coming in, some going back to Mr. Hakamada from iSpace, some going to all panelists. We're talking about information sharing and the importance of getting those information sharing processes between actors up and running. We're talking about identifying common goals for space, such as the SDGs. Is there an SDGs for space? I think that's probably one that perhaps goes more in the direction of the UN here. We're also talking about the Kessler syndrome and how do we cope with mitigating against those kinds of risks to ensure that our operations are sustainable. So please do get stuck in there. Okay, right, perfect. Moving on to our last speaker. So this is Mr. Nick Shave, Chair of UK Space, and also a leading principal in Inmarsat. Please, Nick, the floor is yours. I believe you have it. Yeah, perfect. You can just see it on my screen. Okay, over to you, please, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ian. Ambassador, Director, distinguished colleagues in the global space community. I'm really pleased to be here today, to be invited to present this really important event for promoting space sustainability from an industrial perspective. And I think there's going to be two more events looking at other aspects as well in the sector. So Inmarsat, we're very proud of our heritage. We're a satellite operator based in London. We grew out actually of the UN from the International Maritime Organization in 1979. And that heritage continues. We provide significant number of safety services for shipping fleets around the world, well over 100,000 ships of significant size. Also aviation services, particularly to the cockpit, and more to the cabin. We'll all have Wi-Fi on board aircraft soon, and many of us are already using that. Obviously, commercial aviation is impacted by the difficult events we're following at the moment with COVID. So what I wanted to give you an overview of today is how Inmarsat promotes and utilizes the UN LTS guidelines. And just as an initial example, to explain our satellite fleet as a active commercial operator, we have operated satellites for around 40 years. This is our L-band fleet, providing the highly robust, resilient comms, particularly to shipping, as I mentioned earlier, but also aviation and governments around the world. On the right-hand side, you can see where we focus some of our capacity, particularly on major shipping routes and airline routes around the world. So this fleet, as will be continuing into the future. We have some launches this year. We have one actually going to be launched with a Japanese H3 rocket, which is Inmarsat 6A, being built by Airbus at the moment. So they're just going through testing at the moment. Also, we've over the last 10 years, sorry, too fast. Over the last 10 years, we've moved into the Ka band, so that's 20 to 30 gigahertz in terms of bandwidth. And we now have a number of satellites operating at that band. You can see some of the example satellites on the right-hand side, leading from our Inmarsat 5 series, right up to, on the bottom right-hand side there, is the latest satellite being built in our fleet at the moment, which is the Gx10 satellites. And we're actually moving out of GEO next year into the HEO, highly elliptical orbit, you can see there. This service will provide the first broadband system, Ka broadband system for the Arctic region, a very interesting commercial and security region, obviously growing for us. So that was really just an overview of Inmarsat and where we are in terms of our space architecture and networks. And what I'd like to show you now is just a little video about why space sustainability is important in the GEO belt. So this is just a simulation of a debris event happening in GEO. As you can see, unfortunately, there was a collision there. We're now generating thousands of events, and within 18, 19 hours, we're now at least halfway around the GEO arc. Within a day, it's pretty much, you know, all those green items is the new debris items that have been created. And thanks to AGI for that simulation. So we really do need to protect the GEO belt, and Inmarsat has been a major advocate and promoter of this sustainability for a number of years through some initiatives which I'll talk about soon. In terms of the framework for space sustainability, it is quite complex, I think, and we were really pleased as an operator to see that the LTS guidelines were agreed and formally published. We think they provide an excellent framework for commercial and governmental operators going forward. So we are working very hard on implementing those guidelines. But there are other things, as you can see here. You know, in terms of the participating member states, there's a number of different treaties, and ITU also have a big role to play. We have some standards committees in the middle there, ISO and CCSDS in the space domain, and then a range of industry associations where self-governance has developed over the last probably 10 years now in the operator area, and some initiatives like the Space Data Association, which I'll explain a little bit more about. So it is quite a complex framework, and I think I would suggest that we need to see more clarity and more international standardization going forward. And I think the LTS guidelines provide a great framework for us in many areas. So what are we doing specifically in Inmarsat in terms of space sustainability? Well, I think looking at the guidelines, really I'm focusing on the safety of space operations area, B1, B2, B3, and B4 in particular. You know, contact information being provided, accuracy of orbital data, collection and sharing in particular. We've been a real advocate of that. And looking at conjunction assessment regularly and all phases of flight, as well as, you know, capacity building across the sector, across the industry, and awareness of the issues. So we were founder members along with our operator colleagues in Eutelsat, Intelsat and SES in the Space Data Association. We've been a member of a new organization which was set up about 18 months ago called the Space Safety Coalition. We're working hard in the ISO working groups, the relevant working groups, ISOA, as well as an operator trade association, ECSS in Europe as well. We have a space debris working group and a space traffic management working group. And also in the defense, more defense-oriented area, the US DoD CSPOC, or Combined Space Operations Center, an equivalent body in the UK called the UK SPOC, has what we call commercial integration cells. And that's where operators that provide services to governments and the defense sector as well actually sit alongside our government colleagues to make sure we're managing the space environment in the right way. So that's a really important initiative as well. Just a little bit more about Space Data Association. So it is an excellent body which shares data amongst operators, not only where the satellites are on the geo belt, but future maneuver plans. And that's been a real innovation because there's a single database where the information on tracking and orbital positioning of each of these the fleets of these operators, but also where they're going to be moving their satellites based on planned maneuvers. So there are 34 members, as you can see here. Many operators are all around the world. And I think it's around, this is a couple of years old, this slide, about 65% of the active GEO satellites is already covered by this initiative. Obviously focused on geostationary orbit, and I know there are some initiatives looking at how we can reuse this type of collaboration and partnership model in the important growing LEO environment. And really what Space Data Association is about is promoting responsible behavior, and we've been doing that for a number of years. Really looking at timely, actionable collision avoidance techniques and strategies. Sharing of that data. There's actually a database, central database, which has quite commercial information from the operators shared, but it provides the central point for everyone, all the operators that are members to get their information and to get early warning of potential collision avoidance. And really promoting active station keeping inside the GEO boxes that, in terms of the ITU allocation. Also monitoring of radio frequency levels in terms of interference management and space debris management, as I've mentioned, and practices. A few words on the Space Safety Coalition, a separate initiative that started 18 months or so ago. It's not just operators here, it's actually manufacturers and other like-minded companies in the commercial sector that are looking at how we can promote space sustainability. And we see this one as really important for the LEO constellations. It's really sort of light touch, you could call it, coalition of willing space operators and industry stakeholders, no legal entity, and it's all about self-regulation. So it's quite similar to the SDA, which is focused obviously on GEO operations at the moment. All the members then endorse and agree to strive to implement the best practices that we have in this body. So in two interesting examples of the commercial sector doing their own thing to promote space sustainability. And what I'd like to do here is just give you a few examples of what we do practically in terms of operation to implement the LTS guidelines. Our main sources of information are the SDA, as I mentioned, and also the Combined Space Operations Center through the Commercial Integration Cell from Vandenberg Air Force Base in the US. And that provides very regular, up-to-date information on potential collision issues with other operators and satellites in the GEO belt. We have a team working 24/7, 365 inside Inmarsat, which constantly evaluates the collision risks. We're using a range of different tools to do that. And over, in the course of a year, we analyze about 15,000 messages and notifications using those tools to develop what we call COLA events. If a risk does result in a higher than predefined threshold, based on the collision avoidance risk and the distance, then we will look at how we can action satellite maneuvering or ad hoc maneuvers as necessary, or warn other operators through the SDA in particular. That's a really important coordination function. So just practically as well, over the last 3 years, we've performed 12 COLA maneuvers across our fleet of GEO satellites. So we really are looking at how we implement the LTS guidelines. We're looking at how we can expand out of the 6 that I identified already in terms of promotion, particularly in the C series, how we can promote better, more sustainable use of space with other operators. And Inmarsat looks forward to working collaboratively with our international friends and partners as we go forward in this endeavour. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Great presentation there. I think you've really covered a lot of different topics and brought it down into the context of some of the key areas of the guidelines, especially focusing there on Section B, safety space operations, and how that looks like in practice from a company such as yourself. So really appreciate that. Thank you for that presentation. And just a reminder to everyone, these will be made available after the event today. Okay, great. So we're just coming to the Q&A part of the morning session, where we're monitoring the chat as we go, and we're going to pose some questions back to our speakers. So I'll be summarizing the questions and then opening up the floor. And could I just ask our speakers, if anybody is interested in taking the floor, please just turn your camera on, and then I will give you the floor and we can take it away from there. And actually, first of all, I do want to go right back to the very start for a question from Catherine Courtney quite a while ago, which was talking about information sharing. It's exactly what you were just talking about there, Nick, in Section B of the guidelines, where, you know, obviously we've got different operators doing different things around the world. And as we've seen today, we've been jumping around Europe, North Africa, West Africa, Japan, back to Europe on a real whistle-stop tour. I'd love to hear a little bit more about one or two of our speakers in terms of what that information sharing looks like in practice. Perhaps some emerging trends. Are you doing more information sharing? Are you doing less information sharing? Is it easier? Is it more difficult? And how that's going and how that's impacting your company's operations. So I'm just looking to see if anybody wants to come in and give us a few more remarks about that. So as I say, if anybody is interested in taking that question, please just indicate by turning your camera back on. And don't leave me hanging. Okay. Looks like we've got no. Hey, there you go, Nick. Thanks for helping me out there.
No problem, Ian. Yeah, no, very good question. I think in terms of moving forward, we are seeing, well, in the SDA in particular, with our operator colleagues, we are looking at how we can optimize the information and get more accurate predictability about collision, because we're seeing obviously more and more satellites in orbit, others crossing the geo belt as well. So there is an initiative called the Space Data Center 2.0, which is looking at how we can improve through additional software features to get better predictability. So it's really improving the situation. I mean, I've been very impressed with the way that the SDA shares data, and we manage that through an anonymous approach, so that there is a central database which is managed by a commercial company, which was, you know, they won a tender effectively in competition with others, and they then manage the data. So everyone is happy that the commercial aspects are protected, because it's the information that's provided out to everyone that's important. And it's the processing in that database that we're improving and looking at getting much more accurate and better predictability. Hopefully that was useful.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. and it's a nice example of why some of these things are easy to say, but obviously a lot more difficult to do, because as you say, you've opened up another angle and another piece to this puzzle, which is getting that information shared, but also keeping obviously the commercial viability of such a process. I'm just turning again back to the chat, and I'd love to give the floor back to Hakamada-san from iSpace. So we've got a couple of questions coming in your direction. Before I do, actually, I do want to note that obviously resource mining and all of the excitement in the discussions amongst the community that goes along with that is certainly beyond the scope of the topics covered in the LTS guidelines themselves. And whilst ongoing discussions are going on at various different levels, that particular topic is a little bit further. So there have been some interesting questions in that direction that would obviously go into more theory rather than practice, and we're trying to focus very much on kind of operational examples here. But one question that probably is being considered by iSpace, and that is obviously the Kessler syndrome, and I think Nick just touched upon it there in his last presentation. And so Hakamada-san, how do you mitigate in your operations and your planned operations to make sure that you're protected against Kessler syndrome and space debris in general? So please, the floor is yours. Back to you. Thank you.
Well, so first of all, our spacecraft is reaching to the lunar surface at the end, and then that means if we have some trouble during the cruise, and then if we lose control, that is possibility that would be debris. So we are carefully not to happen such a incident during the cruise. And then the another point is, in the long future, there could be many of the satellites going to the lunar orbit and then lunar surface as well. And then there's a possibility that even the lunar orbit, there could be some debris at the end. So I want to, how can I say, try to protect the lunar orbit as well to prevent Kessler syndrome in the future. So the lesson learned from the Earth orbit could be utilized for the lunar orbit as well. So that is important to learn from the Earth orbit how to protect that kind of things in the future. I hope this answers the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for those comments, and thanks for coming back. And thanks again for joining us. I would imagine we're getting late into the evening over there in Tokyo. Okay, the next question here. I'm going to go back to Mr. El Shafi because we got a question just coming in from the chat that's talking about public-private partnerships and how companies can work with the public sector to make sure that space sustainability is moving forward in their operations. So, Mr. El Shafi, you did talk a little bit about how this looks like from your perspective and your operations, but it would be really good to hear a little bit more about the success stories that you've heard, what's working well, and what others can take from those examples of getting space sustainability off the ground. So please, back to you. Thanks.
In my point of view, this is a crucial aspect of the economy itself, is the integration between the government and the private sector or the commercial sector, as in establishing guidelines, rules similar to the LTS guidelines. The request is it's to be applicable to all other governances and to be taken as a guide, not only a guideline, an anchor point to work through it. In my point of view, it's very crucial to have something like the guidelines effectively working all over the sectors and all over the boundaries, especially if there is going to be an international coordination specifically for this space debris subject. It is very important and it's very needed to establish a skeleton framework for all entities to be talking and cooperating with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And yeah, as you say, the guidelines really are the anchor point in terms of describing what things could look like. And then obviously in terms of implementation, voluntary implementation of guidelines, putting them into practice, it's going to look very different depending on which countries and which sectors you're in. But it's nice to hear those comments. Thank you very much for those. On that point, on the collaboration, public and private, I'm just going to put that out to the rest of the speakers to see if anybody else has any comments on that. Before I turn back to Nick, because I just saw a question coming in to Inmarsat about potentially next steps. But before I do that, just on the PPP point, public-private partnerships point, I'm just going to see if anybody else wants to come in after Mr. El Shafi. Okay, not a problem. Everyone's not a problem at all. Okay, great. So Nick, I'm going to go back to you. So we just got a question coming in where it's basically saying, you know, recognizing the self-organization that's going on there between the commercial space sector, and really asking the question, you know, is that enough? And I think we obviously have a question to that. It's probably does need to develop further. So I suppose I'd invite you to just give any comments about where you would see the next step being in terms of taking it to the next level. So please, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, I would, in answer to the question, I would say it's not enough to just have it in sort of self-regulated, if you like, where we are now. Organisations like the SDA came into place because there wasn't more of a framework, you know, perhaps at governmental level. So I would suggest we take the best practices from some of these initiatives and look to utilise the data in a collaborative way, but also get some formal regulations or whatever formalisation is needed. Perhaps at the UN level is the right place to do it. I would suggest that's where we would look to move to, leading on from the LTS guidelines. It would be my recommendation, particularly in the LEO environment. You know, GEO is a little bit more benign. There's still a lot of objects up there, you know, 800 or so operational satellites and many debris objects, but LEO is the real worry from my perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that opens up a really important point about linguistics, because often we talk about space and what is space? Are we talking about that off-Earth economy just above the clouds? Or are we talking about things that go way beyond into MEO, GEO, and then beyond GEO? And I think, yeah, there's definitely different characteristics and different points to the puzzle, depending on what parts of the space you're looking at. So perhaps that is a language point and a terminology point that we need to all put on our to-do lists. Okay, great. I'm going to turn back. Thanks a lot for that, Nick. I'm going to turn back to the chat just for one last question before we close. And it's going in the direction of, okay, so this is one that we missed. It's from David Godity. It's asking for a clearly defined set of goals. Are there a clearly defined set of goals, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs that we have for socio-economic development globally? And I suppose just one quick comment from the UN side. I mean, we have a developing normative framework on space activities, with the LTS guidelines being one of the most recent, or the most recent, new expressions of global consensus around such a topic. So in a nutshell, it's a yes and a no answer. That it's a no in terms of there's no concrete 17 sustainable development goals for space. But obviously we do have lots of goals and lots of ambitions and lots of direction that we can draw from the existing framework. So it's, yeah, it's not quite packaged as snazzily as we have the LTS, as we have the SDGs that obviously we see everywhere, and rightly so in our daily actions. But maybe that's something else to put on the to-do list going forward. Right, okay, so I'm going to just look at the chat one more time. I think we've covered off all of the most recent questions. I do invite all of the speakers to continue to engaging in the chat function. But right now, after that whistle-stop tour of the global space community, I'm going to call an end to the morning session for today's event. So as mentioned, we started with Airbus in Germany, then we moved to Cairo, then down to West Africa, over to Tokyo, and then over back to the UK. So that was really a fantastic slice of the commercial space sector in terms of what space sustainability is looking like in practice in lots of different contexts. So I would now invite everybody to join the afternoon session using the same link in the registration email that you received, where we'll be hearing from another cross-sectional representation of the global commercial space community. I'm going to just share my screen to jump back to the agenda so everybody can see what's coming up this afternoon. We're going to be opening up with another series of 5 speakers, all talking about what space sustainability looks like in practice and how their activities can be mapped across in terms of implementation of the 21 LTS guidelines. We're going to be starting with an Indian company from Truva Space, and then we're going to be moving on to a legal firm from Mexico, actually, who will be talking about a little bit of the work that they're doing to turn put into practice space sustainability. We're then be going back to Europe with D-Orbit in Italy, then back across the Atlantic to Iridium with some speakers from their perspective, and then back to Europe with Space Team in Luxembourg City, Mr. James Schenk. Okay, so that's what's coming up, 2 o'clock Central European time. So now's the time to grab a sandwich or a coffee, depending on what part of the day that you are in. So thanks again for everyone joining us for this morning session. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you also to all of our speakers during the panel sessions for sharing their experiences with us. And also thank you to our opening speakers right back at the very start for their warm words and greetings to us all. So that's it from me for this morning. That's it from everyone here at UNUSA. Thank you for joining us, and see you again in just under 2 hours. So same link in your emails to join us, and see you soon. Okay, take care.